We have a guest to lead off the program today, and as many of you know, we're getting into the meat of the legislative session in Boise, where people call it. The joke is it's sausage making. That's just a figurative reference to what takes place there. But this is where we get down to the nitty gritty, and people start actually introducing bills, and there's debate on bills. Bills get passed. Well, not always, but bills get passed, and then sometimes we get an agreement with the Senate, and then things go on to the governor. I think most of you may remember this from your schooling when you were young. We're at call it almost 7 minutes after 8 o'clock this morning, and we're at 40. And we're joined by one of my two representatives from my district, State Representative Lance Clow. It's 40 right now on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And first of all, Representative, welcome back to the program.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. 40 degrees down there?
Yeah, it was 46 this morning at about 4 o'clock. So.
Yeah, I'm inside, and I think it's around 70 right now.
That's good. Hey,
but the heat is building.
Looks like in the building itself, there's a lot of, the hot air jokes go on, I'm sure, all the time.
Right.
For a lot of folks who are out there, they've been reading a little bit. I know the AP Wire this morning had a lot of snippets about activity going on. And some of it, of course, is grandstanding from the other party about releasing financial information and the like. That will continue, and it happens every year. From your perspective, what do you have cooking right now?
Well, actually, today I'm introducing a couple of bills, and for the public's understanding, when you introduce a bill, that means that it's going from being an idea to a committee, and then the committee makes a determination if the idea justifies printing the bill and giving it a bill number. So I'm presenting two bills today. One is that we've talked about in the past is to the Environment, Energy, and Technology Committee a rule rejection of the annual requirements for testing of residential backflow devices. These are the devices on your sprinkler systems that connect up to the city water. And I believe that the annual testing is onerous at the best and has not the kind of impact that people might expect. So there's actually two rules related to this. The Department of Environmental Quality looks to the Building Safety Department that says you should annually test these devices. So I have to reject the rule that references across, and then on Wednesday I'm going to reject two paragraphs of the plumbing code. And I fully expect these rules will come back in a slightly different format. And I'm not trying to reject anything more than the residential backflow testing, but I can't reject one word or three words. You either reject the full part, which is like usually a paragraph or two, and then you allow that agency to deal with the questions that we pose to them.
Well, we've talked about this before, and your comment was that it's a great way for these people to make a big profit. And we're not against people making a profit, but when it comes on the backs of people who are hardworking already and they've got to be doing this on such a yearly basis, it just seems that we've gotten into that bureaucratic morass once more that probably was not intended in the first place.
Right. Well, I refer to it somewhat as an unfunded mandates. Lots of cities will complain if the state requires them to do something, and the state will complain if the federal government requires them to do something. But who complains when the city requires the consumer to do something? And in this case, it costs the average household with these that has irrigation on their lawns about $25 to $35 per year, and there's virtually no evidence that it is avoided any kind of an issue. In fact, I mentioned to the City Council, because I presented this to the City Council in Twin Falls on December 18th, that I don't even know of ever issuing a boil order as a result of something like this. So, and then wouldn't you know it, last week my house got a boil order. and it was because the city was replacing a fire hydrant. And it, according to them, and this is new information to me, it's required that if they replace a fire hydrant, they warn everybody, you ought to boil for a while because maybe there was contamination. We have to test the water. Well, I thought, the failure of the city water system, which is what would trigger the need for a backflow device, if they're testing or issuing boil orders already, why do we have to test every year? So
You sit here and you mention the cost, and I'm sure there are people out there who say, well, it's only $35. It reminds me of when I was taking my little girl shopping when we were young, and we'd be at the mall, and she'd want to get a Barbie doll or something, and she'd say, but Dad, it's only $7. And I had to remind her that $7 every Saturday added up pretty fast
that's
to a
right.
lot of money. So there are a lot of things in life and a lot of regulations that cost us only $35. But when you
Mhm.
get 10, 20, or 100 of them, then all of
Yeah.
a sudden we're talking some serious money.
Yeah, you're correct. And uh, think about it too this way: is that if the city were to make a determination that they wanted to spend $250,000 a year on something, would people, and then people would raise their eyebrows and say, "Well, what are you spending the money on?" Well, in this case, if there's 10,000 households that have to be tested in Twin Falls, we're talking 250 to $350,000. And if we do like the federal government, and you say, well, how much is that over 10 years? It's $2.5 to $3.5 million.
Money does add up.
Right. So anyway, so I have that one for the environmental. Energy and Technology Committee today. And the other one, which people may be interested in, is last year I passed a bill that dealt with the speed limits while you're passing on two-lane roads, to give some flexibility so people don't get a ticket every time they pass somebody on a two-lane road. So if somebody's going, 50 on a 55 mile an hour road and you go to pass them, you can go above the speed limit to get around them. And people like that bill. I'm not going into the details of that one, but a lot of people then complained about on the interstate how often they're going 80. I'm sure nobody goes more than 80, but they're going 80 miles an hour in the center lane, and someone pulls in front of them going, let's say, 70 or 75. And they stay in that lane for a while, and they create somewhat of an impediment to the person who's going at the speed limit, but the other person is in the left lane instead of staying in the right lane. And often that happens when the person in the right lane is trying to get around an even slower moving vehicle in that lane. So we're just trying to make it official that if you're impeding traffic for an unreasonable period of time, that's an infraction. So I'm going to be presenting that this week too.
Clark
Those
Kaufman.
are
Well,
two things.
sorry to interrupt, but Clark Kaufman last year gave me a sheet that showed nearly 800 potential bills, which obviously we never get to most of them, but you're talking that you've got two ideas. You've got to compete with all these other people who are introducing, sometimes I'm sure, dozens of ideas and bills and people coming in and saying, why don't we do this? How do you get above all that clatter?
Yeah, well, it's every bill is one at a time, and I prefer to think of them they're competing with me, but because mine are the good ideas, right? But first of all, it comes in from two directions. So if there's that many bills, it's from the House and also from the Senate. Many bills are introduced and never. They don't go beyond an introduction hearing. Some bills are personal bills, and there's probably 40 or 50 of those that they're just introduced for the purpose of getting a message out there so people can read it and think about it, and they're not going anywhere. But we act on 300 to 400 bills every year. So maybe half of those bills make it through, and between the two bodies, I don't know, I've never counted them up, but we probably have close to between 25 and 30 committees that are handling these things. So the burden gets a little smaller when you spread it out and take it piecemeal.
Our guest is State Representative Lance Clow, and we're coming up on 8:16. We're at 39, so we are cooling off slightly this morning. The wind changed direction, I suppose. And you're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Top story with Bill Colley. Do you have time to take a telephone call or two?
Sure.
Let's see. We've got
I hope the background noise isn't troublesome.
No, it shouldn't be at all. That's
Okay.
just your colleagues, I'm sure, wailing in the hallways. Caller, you're on the air with State Representative Lance Clow.
Sorry, I just caught the very tail end of what he was saying about using the left lane on the interstate. And I'm curious, are they going to define it or just leave it up in there? Because it sounds like it's going to be just as bad as it is now if it's against the law, but yet they don't define how long or what scenarios you can be in that lane. I've seen it a lot on the freeway where little little cars just hang out over there, and that's just where they drive. So I can see why they need to define it and be able to cite people for it.
Well,
But I'm curious.
let's see, Representative, did you hear all of that?
Yeah, most of it I did, and it's a good point. I asked these same questions because I took this question to the Idaho State Police, and I said, I believe this is an issue that at least my constituents have brought to my attention, and what do you think of the ISP? And they acknowledged that there is an issue, and like many decisions or by your Idaho State Police, some of it's judgmental and what is a reasonable period of time to be impeding traffic. So if somebody's driving in I call it the center lane or the left lane, and they're not going at the maximum speed limit, but cars are backing up behind them, it's almost like the rule of the road, you need to pull over. And if they're not pulling over, then I think, and it's observed, obviously, by a state policeman, they have to make the judgment if they would issue a citation at that point. So there's judgment and called with that, but this at least makes it clear that if you're going to travel in the left lane, you need to keep up with traffic on that side. Now, I don't mean you need to go above 80, but in reality, if you're just cruising, and I've even tried to make this a new habit of mine, is if I'm going 80, 78, whatever, I'm trying to stay in the right lane and more often in case there are people that are more eager to get around me. But it is a judgment call, and where this becomes the biggest problem, and I'm not trying to pick on the trucking industry, but when we have trucks that are governed to maybe go 68 miles an hour, and there's other trucks that are going 70, and they get to a hill, sometimes the trucks try to pass, and sometimes it can take them a long time to get around. And this will just be a reminder to them to be more cautious about where they choose to pass.
We've got to take a break in about a minute, but if I could, can you stick around for another 5 minutes after the break?
Sure.
Because I have a clipping here, and I wanted to mention this in the next segment from Kaiser Health News. Well, Kaiser, Kaiser, clearly means it's an industry publication, and they're really in a snit about plans in Idaho on health care. And this thing was, 4 or 5 pages long. I happened to see it this morning, but I think it might be worth addressing for just a couple of minutes in the next segment.
Okay.
We're speaking with State Representative Lance Clow. He's joining us this morning from the state capitol in Boise. We're at 42. We're at 19 minutes after 8 o'clock, and what we'll do is have a short break and then wrap up with the representative. Also coming up at 8:30 this morning, Twin Falls County Republican Party Chairman Steve Millington will be on the air with us. A lot to talk about there as well. A quick note, we are looking at some really nice weather going into next week. The long-range forecast, we're talking maybe near 60 degrees in a lot of places. But still, some cold overnights if you're struggling heating your home. Remember, you need to call the pros at Ramsey Heating and Electric in Burley. They'll come out and they'll get the job done, and they'll get it done right the first time. Problem-free, cozy winters are found at Ramsey Heating and Electric, 2600 Overland Avenue in Burley. The telephone number 208-678-0459. That's Ramsey Heating and Electric, where they sell warm winters and cool summers. You're listening to Top Story with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. We're joined during this segment of the program by State Representative Lance Clow, and we're talking about some issues that will be obviously talked about a lot over the next several weeks during legislative session. We're 22 minutes after 8 o'clock, and it's 41. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. Just wanted to mention quickly, if you're struggling listening to our program this morning, it may not be the radio, it might be your ears. You need to call the pros as well. Lots of pros we deal with on this radio station, but at Mount Harrison Audiology, Dr. Christine Pickup is a certified audiologist. She's also an independent business owner. She'll never use deceptive advertising to sell a hearing aid. No bait and switch, no seeking participants to try a type of aid. At Mount Harrison Audiology, you'll be offered your choice of brands with recommendations based on your hearing and your goals, local and independent. You can trust Dr. Pickup with your hearing and your budget. Call to schedule your appointment today, 208-312-0957. Some people get upset with the fact they think Idaho makes too much national news over legislative matters. It doesn't bother me, I guess, that much because I don't live in other states. But there's a story we mentioned in the last segment from Kaiser Health News. And apparently a lot of people are paying attention to what's going on here with changes in Idaho's insurance coverage, which they say runs counter to the Affordable Care Act, and that they say if there's a legal challenge, Idaho can't do this. But on the other hand, Dean Cameron, who of course is running the insurance department, says we need to do some of these things just to try to keep this program afloat and maybe even cover more people. State Representative Lance Clow is on the telephone with us, and I know that while it may not be your committee, perhaps, you're used to having these things pop up and get some national attention. Do you think this is one of those things that's going to explode on us, or are we going to be able to work this out?
From what I understand about what they're attempting to do, there's actually several things, and one has to do with the dual waiver, but I believe what they're referencing here is they are trying to encourage insurance companies to come out with non-ACA plans, Affordable Care Act plans, or Obamacare, plans. And those, the idea is to try and curb the rising cost of insurance. And that one of the side effects of the Affordable Care Act was the rapid rise in insurance premiums for everybody. And if they'd raised your taxes on those policies that much, you'd be outraged. But what's happened is that with all the changes, the people that have been insured historically with traditional types of insurance, their policies are skyrocketing in cost. And it's not a tax directly, but because they changed the rules for insurance companies, and the insurance companies have to pass along these costs, and the related impacts of covering more illnesses and more people, and the burden falls on quite often what you might classify as a healthy family or a healthy individual. So these people are now starting to want to drop their insurance. If you'll recall, and again, I'm not an insurance expert or an ACA expert, but earlier this year they were taking away at the federal level the penalties for not having insurance, and that was what was happening. Tax penalties for not carrying the proper insurance. Well, those people were finding it was cheaper to pay tax than to have insurance in many cases, or to pay the penalties. So now what we're trying to say, well, why don't we at least give them some kind of insurance option so they can at least buy insurance and get more people covered. So the idea is to lower the cost of insurance overall, and I think it's a noble effort. There's a lot of attorneys that look at this. The insurance companies aren't going to offer these plans if they don't think they're going to hold up. So I think it's a very healthy discussion and a direction to attempt to go.
We only got a couple of minutes left. A lot of attention being paid, at least from callers to my show, about this. There's going to be a discussion about the Article 5 convention that has been set up. But as I understand it, this is mainly just an informational meeting. Doesn't necessarily mean that all of you are going to be turning around and getting on board with the notion of the convention.
There was a meeting announced by the speaker, and they have an expert coming in that he met. I'm trying to remember, he's a professor somewhere, and he's coming in to talk about how people get along, and he referenced the original Constitutional Convention, in 1798 or whatever year that was, and how he's an expert on what went on then, and it has been interpreted to me, and this is an Article 5 convention required mandatory attendance. It's mostly to say, how did people get along during that convention? How did we get the Constitution? And it has nothing to do with promoting an Article 5 convention, but people that some people have blogged some information out there like that, so now it's become a fact. And this meeting, I want to say it's February 9th, it's coming up here, and it's not about the Article 5 convention or proposed convention. It's trying to say how the original Constitutional Convention that brought us our current Constitution nearly collapsed, and how people brought things back together, and how George Washington, I was just reading another book on this, and how George Washington, his demeanor really held it together. I mean, there were delegates going home I think the New York delegation left that convention.
They had to go
so,
shovel snow.
Right. Yeah, maybe so. But this meeting that's been recommended has more to do with decorum and how you treat people and work together and listen to ideas and things, and has nothing to do with an Article 5 convention. I'm taking the speaker at his word on that one, and I have no reason why I shouldn't. But because he mentioned the original Constitutional Convention, people interpreted it to mean, oh, this is an Article 5 convention we're required to go listen to, or a proposal. So, and it's not that.
Well, I'm glad you cleared that up, and we look forward again to talking sometime soon. I know you have to get off to committees this morning and get back to work, but keep us posted.
Okay. All right, Bill. Thank you. Thanks to everybody. All right. Bye-bye.
State Representative Lance Clow joining us this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Quick note, tomorrow morning, one of the medical pros from Tripp Family Medicine in Twin Falls will be joining us between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. I do want to remind you the doctor's office is still looking for new patients, and as a patient of Dr. Tripp or the staff, they can generally see you on the very same day. If you call early in the morning and say you've got a medical issue, if they can't see you that day, generally within 24 hours. I do want to point out as well, the office is located on Fillmore Street in Twin Falls, directly across from the main post office. We're at 41, Top Story with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Steve Mellington, the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party, on the way in just a few minutes.